I always get a kick out of presidential primaries. It's that magical time once every 4 years where suddenly America is stricken with dire political emergencies and battle lines drawn in the sand of the minds and hearts of Americans. That wonderful time where the people who generally agree on most things regarding political policy suddenly become bitter enemies, and my Facebook feed ceases to be funny memes and baby pictures. Instead, I'm barraged by attack ads, political memes, and people who never studied political science commentating as though they are experts. You may relax, though. I'm not about to preach about our political system or endorse a candidate from the pulpit. It's like in Muppet Treasure Island, when the lead singer of Electric Mayhem goes, "Hey man, are we on the side of the pirates or the captain?" And the guitarist says, "No man, we're just here to play the gig. Don't get caught up in politics." And Animal goes, "Politics, politics." I like Muppets. No, I'm bringing it around this week to our namesake, St. Paul. Today in 2 Corinthians, no, not 2 Corinthians, a common mistake. Couldn't resist. We read Paul's strong-handed argument for the primacy of Jesus' covenant over the primacy of Torah. This perspective of primacy is a perspective, and it's one we've strongly held to in Christian history. The tricky part, though, is if we take Paul at face value without knowing what he's arguing against, it's like taking the opinions of one candidate of either party as the unbiased, truthful depiction of the way our country is and should be run. This points us to the primacy of context. Context matters. Who here was taught that Paul was a convert from Judaism to Christianity? I was. Raise your hand. Yeah. The verdict, however, is not so clear in light of recent scholarship. I find myself in agreement with New Testament scholar and professor Pamela Eisenbaum, who claims that Paul was in fact never a convert to Christianity. In reality, Christianity didn't really exist in the time of Paul. It was a Jewish sect. Eisenbaum claims that Paul was a champion of coexisting covenants, Torah for the Jews and the one with Jesus. Now, Paul's primary mission is to the Gentiles, which means non-Jews, so everybody else. For Jews, Torah is complete. It's the means of relating to God, and it's the way to be reconciled to God in light of sin for the people of Israel. For the nations that had not been given Torah, everybody else, Paul understood that there needed to be a different covenant for them, which Jesus provided. This is a stroke of genius on Paul's part. If only his snark had not been taken as unbiased truth. Another tricky thing is that the followers of Jesus, led by Peter and James, were Jews and therefore under Torah. And they understood that the Anointed One was to be in service of the Torah. It made no sense that they would need a new covenant with Jesus. Thus, we have a staunch disagreement between Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles, and Peter, the apostle to the Jews. When this dispute is read outside of this context, it paints a distorted picture that gets misinterpreted throughout Christian history. Context matters. The New Testament has plenty of passages that paint an evil picture of Jews as being responsible for Jesus' death. Even as early as the 2nd century, the Didache, one of the early extant Christian texts written by, I believe it was Ignatius, describes Judaizing, or telling people that they have to convert to Torah observance, is monstrous. And then Justin Martyr claims that Jews are the false Israel of the flesh, and Christians are the true Israel of the spirit. Yeah, wow is right. This problematic misunderstanding gets particularly uglier in the Protestant Reformation through Martin Luther's interest in grace, which is a great thing, don't get me wrong, but then to his gradual descent into anti-Jewish rants as he begins to develop health issues and becomes embittered at the betrayals he constantly encountered. Luther's rants, when taken out of context later in history, informed much of the thinking of Nazis in World War II. Again, without knowing that Luther was embittered dealing with trying to convert the Jews and failing, and being betrayed at every turn when trying to reform the Roman Catholic Church, we end up getting a twisted support for an attempted genocide that comes from a man who originally was courageous and who stood up to corrupt power. Context matters. What started as an in-group dispute between Peter and Paul became a wedge issue, much like homosexuality in the Anglican Communion, and like our polarizing approach in the political primaries. All of these situations point to two key issues we can address as children of God, knowing that context matters. First, disagreement does not equal disapproval. Sadly, we have often been taught to see that it does. That was very much how I understood the world until a few years ago. The idea that we can find the right argument and agree that it's correct is not always accurate. In fact, I think at times this assumption gets in the way of the relationship God is trying to lead us into. The stories that help us make meaning of the world and make good decisions are often very different for each person. Raise your hand if you have any perspective that makes you different from anybody else in this room. Precisely. So you bring a precious gift that is unique to you that everyone can learn from. If we assume that we all have the same story, the same criteria for making these decisions, we often misunderstand what it is we're trying to make together when we share our stories with one another, when we come together in church, when we end up talking to family members about religion and politics, the two taboo topics. For Paul and James, both were trying to make the kingdom of God that Jesus was pointing to come about. However, it meant different things for each of them, and both frameworks made perfect sense within their tradition and within their own logic. Context matters. Second, we have the opportunity for growth if we stay open. In the contentious political reality in which we live, where in-group battles happen inside of parties, and all-out war seems to be happening between parties, it is very easy to fight and shut down in conversations with those with whom we disagree. This reaction can drive wedges between family members, friends, and strangers in a way that detracts from the commitment we make to live together with our differences. We are faced with the opportunity to react from fear and reject those with whom we disagree. We also are given the opportunity to take a moment, step back, and when faced with difference that doesn't fit our understanding of the world, ask, can I coexist with this person, even if they stretch what makes sense to me? What informs why they think the way they do? If we seek to shut down the opposition, I think maybe we miss the point of the gospel that Paul is trying to point us to. Now, Paul's not really doing a very good job of being in good relationship with his fellow apostles, but he's trying to show the inclusivity of God. So perhaps we will learn from the mistakes of our fathers, and perhaps we will listen a little more to our mothers as well. Perhaps it is time to set aside emphasis on differences and begin to look more closely on what our common mission is together. Next time we are faced with how to respond to an offensive statement religiously or politically, we have the opportunity to ask questions of the person, to seek to understand them, rather than trying to argue against them. Who knows what we may mutually learn from this approach? Maybe we'll begin to learn from the mistakes of Paul and James, or Paul and Peter, and from our political leaders. We'll continue to live into our common life together and share the meal that unites us in our differences and love one another, instead of trying to shut the other down in favor of our own viewpoint. Let us meditate on this today as we come to the table together, remembering that in every moment of seeking understanding, every moment of appreciating difference, context matters.